SORBA Chattanooga was founded in 2003. If you were in Chattanooga in 2003, you had 7 miles of trail to ride. You had 4 miles, I believe, at Booker T, and 3 miles, which I'm still trying to track down where that was. I think it was at Harrison Bay.
Welcome to Trail Effect. I am your host, Josh Blum. Trail Effect is a show that dives into the stories behind trails, the communities that embrace trails, and the people who rely on trails as a way of life. The goal of this show is to turn the stories you will hear from our guests into useful knowledge that can be applied to your community while providing some entertaining and inspirational content. Guests on Trail Effect include trail builders, board members, community leaders, volunteers, and regular people who really enjoy trails. For episode 176, we have Mike Gehard. Mike is currently the president of SORBA Chattanooga. If you've been following along for a while, you've heard several guests talk about Walden's Ridge in Chattanooga. Now you'll get the full story on mountain biking in Chattanooga, along with the fact that SORBA Chattanooga is currently looking to hire their first executive director. Mike also provides a bunch of insight that he has learned through volunteering and working with multiple organizations. Cooley Creative is the title sponsor for this episode. They design and build custom websites, as well as help companies with branding, photography, and e-commerce. Cooley Creative was started in Wisconsin, but is now based out of Bend, Oregon. Jared from Cooley Creative is a friend of mine. We've traveled together on multiple mountain bike trips, and sometimes he sends it. For more information about Cooley Creative, head on over to www.dudejustsendit.com. Yes, that's right, www.dudejustsendit will get you to the Cooley Creative website, so check it out. I would like to highlight another affiliate partner of the Trail Effect podcast, which is the Loam Pass. The Loam Pass is your one pass for 40-plus destination bike parks. When you purchase the Loam Pass, you get 2 days at each partner location, as well as an additional third day for half off. That means if you went on some epic road trip, you'd have over 80 days of access to some of the best bike parks, period. When you purchase your Loam Pass through the affiliate link found on the Trail Effect website or found in the show notes, you will receive free pass protection. Yes, that's right, free pass protection. And you'll be supporting the Trail Effect podcast as well. Some of the 40-plus destinations include Ride Rock Creek, Ride Canoga, Angel Fire Bike Park, the Keweenaw Adventure Company, Chestnut Mountain Resort, Jared's Place, Spirit Mountain, Marquette Mountain, Burke Mountain, Howler Bike Park, and many more. So click on the link provided or the Loam Pass, support the Trail Effect podcast, and get free pass protection. Thank you. Cattle Mountain Apparel, the brand that was built by travelers, hikers, trail runners, and mountain bikers, with the motto of venture far, laugh hard. While I definitely use Cattle Mountain apparel for mountain biking, Cattle Mountain is also my go-to choice for daily wear as it is super functional and comfortable. Cattle Mountain Apparel also offers a lifetime gear repair program with the goal of extending the life of their products while reducing waste in the process. If you ever damage any of your apparel, Cattle Mountain will repair it for free for life. By using the affiliate link found in the show notes or on the Trail Effect website, a small commission will come back to the Trail Effect podcast, which helps to cover the cost of expenses for keeping this show going. Now on to the Trail Effect with Mike Gehard. Everything you say is now being recorded and can be used to help promote trail advocacy. How's it going today, Mike?
Going pretty well. And yourself, Josh?
Good. So Mike is the president of SORBA Chattanooga, which is an absolute powerhouse of a trail community down in the SORBA neighborhood, otherwise known as, technically that's East Tennessee still, correct?
That is East Tennessee, yes.
Yeah, Tennessee is a very long, narrow state.
Yeah, I mean, you go from Memphis on the west to Nashville in the northwest to Knoxville and Chattanooga in the east. And it's weird because it's a parallelogram, so technically northeast Tennessee is farther east than southeast.
Yeah, it is weird. So the topography around Chattanooga, for those who have never been there, is just incredible. There's a lot there, there's steep ridges and valleys. It lends itself awesome to all forms of outdoor recreation, from paddling to mountain biking to climbing. You guys have it all. And it's a community that's really embraced outdoor recreation on all levels, from, public elected officials, public hired officials. Like, I mean, when we were mountain biking together, we ran into the fire chief, right?
Yep. Fire chief, he rides bikes at a very high level as well. So Yeah, it's interesting. I've been socializing, calling Boulder the Chattanooga of the West these days, and my friends in Boulder definitely shake their fists at me. But yeah, I mean, we've got tons of outdoor recreation from climbing to kayaking to paddleboarding to mountain biking to hiking to all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I think I'd be shaking my fist at you too if I lived in Boulder because I've not spent much time in Boulder but from what I can tell, there's a lot more trail access for mountain biking in Chattanooga than there is in Boulder.
I lived in Boulder for 10 years. So I can adequately talk about that. And there's a lot more in Chattanooga proper than there is in Boulder. And I won't bore readers or listeners with the details of why that is, but one would think that Boulder would have better access to mountain biking than it does.
Well, that's a good segue into your path to Chattanooga because it didn't start in Chattanooga. I believe it maybe started outside of Chicago, if I remember correctly, but you spent a lot of time out west, as you all just alluded to. But let's talk about how like what led you to getting to Chattanooga, maybe a couple of things you did prior to moving to Chattanooga.
Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, a little town called Des Plaines, which is right out by O'Hare Airport. Was in the Boy Scouts. My family really didn't do outdoorsy stuff, but my brothers and I were in Boy Scouts and, kind of fell in love with the outdoors then. Looked at myself in the mirror when I was 29 with a successful tech career and said, I got to get out of Chicago before I turn 30. So I packed up my Jeep. I think I was driving a Jeep Cherokee at the time and headed west for Vail. So I lived in Vail for 8 seasons. Anybody that's lived in a ski town knows you talk about seasons and not years in ski towns. That seems to be the way we measure time in ski towns. Went to work for a small nonprofit that used snowboarding to reach underserved kids called SOS Outreach. Skied my brains out, guided rafts for 2 summers, lived in my truck for a summer and a half. So yeah, was in Vail for 8 years, got back into tech, moved to Boulder in 2010. So I was in Vail from 2002 to 2010, moved to Boulder in 2010, fell in love with the Front Range, and it has definitely changed since I was there and while I was there. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like, all right, I'm kind of done with the Front Range. I mean, it's crowded there. I don't know how many people are in Denver, but I want to say it's a couple of million people. And what happens is those folks who all move to the Front Range of Colorado for the outdoors descend on all the mountain bike trails that are west of town. It just gets really crowded. So you end up at White Ranch on a Friday afternoon and you can't park your car because everybody else and their brother and sister is out there mountain biking. So decided to check out some other places, looking for the next cool town. My brother has been in Chattanooga for 25 years off and on. So I'd been down there to visit him, went down during the pandemic. 6 months later, I'd bought a house and we just moved my folks to Chattanooga in April of 2023. So now the whole family is within a mile of each other in St. Elmo. And just fell in love with it. Everything I loved about being out west. So we have no skiing, but luckily I'd skied for 8 years, knee deep powder on a Wednesday. Got that out of my system. So we got mountain biking, climbing, paddling, really burgeoning food scene. So we've got some really cool restaurants in town. I think we were just voted by some magazine one of the better up and coming food scenes. So yeah, that's how I ended up in Chattanooga, just looking for the next place to be. I had family down there, and now we're kind of pushed all in on town.
You very quickly got involved with SORBA Chattanooga then, because as we are talking today, you're the president. I don't think you land in Chattanooga and become the president overnight, although you almost did.
Yeah. So I moved there in September 2020. And one of the things that I started to get involved in while I was in Boulder was building trail. So shout out to the Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance and their trail crews. So started digging in the dirt when I was in Colorado. And when I moved to Chattanooga, I knew that I had an opportunity to get involved. And luckily, yes, I've been there just under 4 years, but really I already had a community built when I got there. So I showed up in town. My brother rides bikes. I had ridden with a bunch of folks, most of them on the SORBA board when I moved to town. So kind of a combination of wanting to dig in the dirt. Walden's coming online, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. tons of trail days. Already knowing people, it was just I just dove head first and just started rolling, and here we are, almost 4 years later, president of the organization, have being trails director. And I guess the lesson to take away is get involved, and stuff's just going to happen when you push all in on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I know there's many guests that have been on the show that have similar paths that have gotten involved and somehow found themselves in leadership positions pretty quickly, which is awesome because the people we have in this community definitely are go-getters, and that's what we need. With that, you arrived at the 2024 PTBA Conference in Georgia, which isn't terribly too far from your place. That's, we met just a few days before that as I was traveling down to Georgia. We had connected prior to that, and you had reached out and said, "Hey, if you're ever coming through Chattanooga, let me know, and we'll give you a tour." And we just happened to be able to ride Walden's Ridge. But that conference was your first PTBA conference. You not only were there as a guest or attendee, you were also a presenter. So you seem to jump right into things right out of the gate. Let's talk about the attendee side before we get into the presentation side and get your thoughts on just, getting yourself into that community.
Yeah. I mean, PTBA is interesting. So we had some PTBA folks in town, when Imba Trail Solutions was in town building Walden's. We have Barry Smith Trails. Barry's a PTBA member. He's a local to Chattanooga. It was interesting. So I'm a software developer by trade and have been to many conferences as both a speaker and an attendee, in the tech world. So it's cool to attend a conference in a world that I was relatively new to, and not only new to, but not as an outsider, but not as the focus. So you look at PTBA, it's the Professional Trail Builders Alliance. So we're talking to a bunch of trail builders, folks that are building trail, but as the representative of a trail advocacy nonprofit, it's an interesting vibe because you're there with a lot of people who are trying to sell services, but also know each other, but also share a passion for the sport. And we had some really interesting discussions. Like Jeremy Poole and I have crossed paths multiple times. We were in Old Fort for a SORBA conference last year, 2 years ago, and he and I met. So knew some folks. So you had these interesting discussions because you've got professionals who are pushing services on one end. They're trying to make money, run businesses. You've got really trail advocacy organizations who are kind of customers, but maybe not really because they may be dealing directly with the land manager for building trails. But it was great to have those discussions of, hey, let's all get together, figure out how we can all win at this game of building trails, not only from a money-making side, but from a community side, from a advocacy side. So it was really interesting. I mean, it was super fun, great group of folks to hang out with. So yeah, that's a lot of rambling, but I think it was interesting to be there and see the community try to figure out where we're headed all together to make this thing win. Because if we don't all go together, then somebody loses out.
It's interesting because, and I've brought this up a lot, but being at a conference like that, you really get to see it, which is, trails have been around since like people have moved vertically, right? Or, on foot, pre bikes, pre vehicles, pre horses, even, trails were, a mode of transportation for, from point A to point B. But the actual industry part of it or the business aspect of it is new. And we have, obviously, like any other trade, we have growing pains. So I'm assuming it was interesting for you to kind of see it from that angle because you get to see a lot of different things that you wouldn't normally get to see when you attend a conference like that.
Yeah. I mean, you forget that there's a business around this, and it's interesting to see the business. I mean, you look at what Greg Mizzou just did in shutting down his business. He has just shuttered a business building trails, and Greg has his reasons, and talking to Greg about those. So it's interesting the business side because I see it from the nonprofit passion side of these are trails, these are how I spend my free time, these are sometimes how I get my therapy. And as we move further and further down this path of them becoming both a business and a passion, we all have to do it together, because too much business, we all know where that ends up. We all have our theories on capitalism and whatnot. Not enough business, and that brings its own set of problems, as many of us nonprofit, mostly all volunteer trail advocacy organizations can lament with. So I'm excited to be part of that discussion. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where we all move towards. As an engineer, so I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering. I know what engineered solutions look like. And you and I have talked about how much of this is an art, how much of this is science, how much of this needs to be, not regulated, but at least codified and standardized. And, well, I'm sure get everybody's, hair on end about some of this stuff, but it's interesting. And we're early in this space, and I don't know where we're going to go, but there's some cool trails being built. Some of the stuff that I've seen and ridden, like you look at Walden's, it's nuts.
Yeah, Walden's is an awesome place, and we're gonna get there soon. As part of your conference experience, you also were a presenter, and your presentation was lessons from going from 7 miles of trail to 100+ miles of trail in 20 years, all driven by volunteers, which is in Chattanooga. What were some of the key topics that you wanted to hit on in that, and what were some of the takeaways from that? Because I think that was probably one of them. I wasn't able to attend that due to a session that I was actually in as a co-presenter, so I didn't get to see your presentation. But what were some of the takeaways and some of the stuff you wanted to hit on during that presentation?
Some of that presentation was just getting the word out. Again, I wanted to be the voice for the nonprofit trail organization and advocacy organization with the professionals. And part of it was selfish, is like collecting the history of Chattanooga. SORBA Chattanooga was founded in 2003. If you were in Chattanooga in 2003, you had 7 miles of trail to ride. You had 4 miles, I believe, at Booker T, and 3 miles, which I'm still trying to track down where that was. I think it was at Harrison Bay. So part of my reason for speaking was just to collect the SORBA history. 20 years of building trails. We've gone from 7 miles to 167 miles by Trail Forks calculations within 30 minutes of downtown in 20 years. So fast forward to 2024, you show up in Chattanooga with that much trail, and it's a very different place. So part of it was just to show people, here's how this works. Here's how trail communities get built. Trails don't fall from the sky. They get scratched in the dirt by a bunch of passionate volunteers who are like, if we don't build this stuff, it ain't going to happen. So we've started there, going through land manager relationships. So anybody that deals with land managers knows they can be amazingly rewarding and infinitely frustrating all at the same time. And we have, I want to say, 6 or 7 land managers in town. Land managers that we specifically deal with, but also land managers like Southern Adventist University that has a trail system called White Oak that we don't directly deal with, but deal with tangentially because we talk to them all the time about trails. So, just bring to light, like, these relationships exist. Here's what they look like. And then really to make the case that at some point, the biggest danger to an all volunteer trail stewardship organization is getting out over your skis and building too much trail. And I'm going to say that right now, like, we are struggling in Chattanooga to now maintain everything we have built. And this is going to be a common theme, and really just start to show people, like, you can be too successful as volunteers, because everybody loves building trail, but maintaining trail, that's a whole different story. So those were kind of the 3 things that I tried to get across.
What kind of feedback did you receive as you were presenting? I'm sure it was an interactive session, and people, at least had questions at the end, but maybe brought up comments in the middle. Is there anything that stuck out to how that went for you?
Some of that stick out to me. So Barry Smith came up to me after the talk, and he had never seen the history of Chattanooga's mountain biking put together in one place, which is, the dude built all the trails in Chattanooga. Raccoon Mountain, so that was really cool to, like, part of it was just see Barry just get a grander understanding of just have it put in front of him. I had a handful of folks from the kind of advocacy side come up and start to ask me about money and thank me for bringing this point up. I mean, we can all, and probably everybody listening to this podcast can agree that we need more money for trails, mostly maintenance. I want to say I had a professional builder come up. There were so many talks at the PTBA conference. I'm not sure. I can't forget who was in the room, but I think I had a builder come up and just kind of nod their head about like, yeah, like this is the thing. And there was a whole round table, I think later in the day that Jeremy Poole ran about trail maintenance. So it was, but I think, just at least an understanding of like, hey, here's the other side of this coin. So mostly it was people like, yeah, I agree with you. Like, how do we do this?
I mean, I've said it so many times during this podcast, as a society, and it doesn't matter what the infrastructure is. We're all about building the new stuff, and the maintenance seems to get forgotten about, whether it's roads, buildings. I mean, like all the things, right? Taking out the trash, mowing the lawn, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's all about sustainability. Our goal is to make these trails sustainable in perpetuity. And this is our legacy to our communities.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's kick this off with Walden's Ridge, but then we're going to get into the other Chattanooga trail systems because, and I'm going to bring up White Oak Mountain because my first time mountain biking in Chattanooga was at that, 7-day Adventist campus, which is an interesting dynamic in itself. But let's kick it off with Walden's Ridge because I think that's at least your newest trail system, or at least the system that's gotten, maybe not your newest because I've seen some other stuff, but the system that's gotten the most media coverage due to how it came to be and what it is. And rightfully so, because there's some key elements to that trail system. I know that I took away that I'm like, oh, I want to definitely incorporate this into my designs in the future. But let's talk about Walden's Ridge on your perspective and what it means to the community.
Yeah. So Walden's Ridge is 200 acres of property on the side of Signal Mountain that is now, most importantly, protected in perpetuity from any development. And it is 10 minutes from downtown Chattanooga, depending on how you drive. So a huge win for us was protecting that land, creating a county park that is now in a conservation easement in perpetuity. So none of that land would ever be developed, which is pretty amazing. 7 years in the making, the blood, sweat, and tears that went into that place that I can talk about, and that I can't talk about because there are some things that, happen behind the scenes that you don't necessarily need to see how the sausage gets made, but it was a huge lift for the community. So for those of you unfamiliar with Walden's, we have 2 climbing trails. They are multi-use. They are bi-directional, open to everybody, hikers, bikers, runners, dog walkers. We have 3 traverse trails that are also multi-use, bi-directional, that cut across the mountain. We then have 4 downhill lines, bike only, downhill only, that are divided by the middle traverse into 8 trails. Kind of picture that in your head. You've got a box, you've got some lines running across the box, and then you've got some downhill trails coming down the box. Everything from kind of techie blue enduro style runs to Bullwinkle, which is probably the biggest on the mountain, a trail that I roll through but do not ride. I don't really consider myself riding that trail. That we're talking jumps, maybe A-line size, some of the smaller jumps on A-line at the Whistler Bike Park. That's the spectrum at Walden's. There's a couple of blue jump trails, which are super fun, biscuits and gravy and bread and butter, also better known as the gluten loop around town. And then stuff in between. Other cool thing about Walden's is there is bouldering there. So if you're looking at the mountain, the upper right-hand corner of the property, there's a bunch of boulders that have been developed by the Southeast Climbers Coalition. So another nonprofit advocacy group in town. So you've got boulderers out there as well. So it's really, for our community, a place that everybody can go, spend some time, that would be protected in perpetuity from development.
obviously the trail system's fun. You described fun, right? The biggest takeaway that I had though, aside from the fun, is how easy it is to navigate. So I followed you. We did, I don't know, 3 laps or something like that. We did a bunch of riding, and then I went up for one more after that. But the reality is that I could have gone there sight unseen, looked at the map, realized that the 2 climbing trails flank either side of it, and that there's these 3 traverse trails, and it would have been very easy for me to navigate. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges we have currently in trail designing and planning, is that, navigation is usually pretty difficult in a lot of even new systems. And I can't speak highly enough as to how that was laid out, because you can now, I could pick one of the climbing trails. I could go to the top. I could go to the middle. I could go from the top to the middle, go across and link just all these different lines up and not get lost. Right. And and create the experience that I want, depending on the time that I have or my fitness ability or whatever factors you're looking at when picking your experience. Right.
Yeah, I mean, IMBA Trail Solutions, that was built as part of a Trail Accelerator grant. So they did a great job. And I think the downhill park, like the bike park nature of that place, lends itself to that. You compare that to something like Raccoon Mountain, and anybody that's ridden Raccoon Mountain knows that is just a rat's nest of trails that we have tried to sign, but it's just a hard thing to sign. So I think because it's new, it follows some standards. It was built with that kind of bike parky notion in mind. It makes it really easy to navigate. And I love your comment of you can kind of choose your own adventure. It is kind of funny. The more people I talk to around town, they're like, oh, I don't want to go to Walden's. It's too hard. I don't like jumping. I was like, great. Don't jump. Ride up so my favorite route at Walden's, for those of you listening, I am 51 years old. I like leaving the ground, but we're talking like 6 inches to a foot off the ground, because when I hit the ground and hurt myself, it takes a long time to heal. So what I'll do is I'll ride up. You go up lower lift ticket. So you're going to go out of the parking lot at the bottom. You're going to go right up the hill. You go to the middle traverse. You ride across the middle traverse. You work on your slow speed rock tech. You then climb upper escalator to the upper traverse. You can then go across the upper traverse and then down Thrasher and Ollie. That's a really great loop. Your wheels really don't leave the ground. Everything is rollable. We see a bunch of cross-country riders out there. So dudes on single speed, dudes in spandex, ladies in spandex, just like out there, just figure eighting them out, because you can go up and down both sides. So, and your wheels don't ever have to leave the ground. So I think the other point, not only is it easy to navigate, but I think we want people to understand that was built for everybody. Now, some people will complain that the climbing trails are steep, and they are because of the way the property is set up. We couldn't do much about that. There are really no green trails out there. We're working on trying to fit one in, but the terrain's just really hard for green trails. But you can go out there, choose your own adventure. You don't have to climb to the top. You don't have to leave the ground. You can go out there and just explore, and there's tons of good sites.
I've not traveled as much as some people think I have with the amount of people that I've been able to have on this podcast, but I didn't think that climbing was too terribly steep. I know there's stuff that I've ridden that's newer than Walden's Ridge as far as climbing trails go that were steeper, and so I thought it was pretty appropriate for the amount of elevation. I mean, you go, obviously you want to stay within the half rule as far as sustainability and that goes when it comes to building anything, but you go like too green, like too long or too mellow, and it becomes such a drawn out climb that people figure out ways to try to shortcut it, right? And I think this was just appropriate.
Yeah. Yes and no. I think it is not horrible. I mean, I have been on climbs where I've pushed my bike for a half mile. I mean, there's a climb in Fernie called Lactic Ridge that gets you to the top of this trail called S-Bomb. And I literally pushed my bike uphill for, I believe it is a half a mile, and at times had trouble hiking up this trail. So there are worse. I will agree with you, Josh. And I talked to one of the locals at the bike shop, and he's like, yeah, everybody pushes up that thing. But you go to somewhere like Cumberland in British Columbia, and I'm going to start to name drop here because I have traveled a bunch to ride bikes. You go to a place like Cumberland in British Columbia, and you climb 7 miles on a green climbing trail that gets you to pretty much the top of the system, and you feel better than when you started. So it just depends on what terrain you have and how you build the trail and what your community is doing. So it is not horrible, but I have been on easier climbing trails that have gotten me to the tops of mountains longer, but not spent by the time I get there. So it just depends on what you're handed and what you can build.
That's why I love having these conversations, because so many different people can bring different perspectives in to this stuff. And those are two very different perspectives in terms of the two trails you just described, but very relevant to the conversation that some people can obviously relate to. Should we go off on the shuttle rant that we had talked about?
Yeah, let's go there. I'm going to do my best to not stick my foot in my mouth, but I'm going to incite some flame wars, and we'll see those play out in the comments, and we can deal with them there.
Sounds good. Well, this is your opinion, my opinion, based on the experiences we've had, and I think it's good for people to capture that data, right?
Yeah. We're all riding bikes for a different reason, and very few of us are getting paid to do it. So,
yeah. So let's go to Shuttles, because you're talking about pushing a minute ago, and kick it off.
Where do we start?
Let's preface this with maybe we should define what we mean by shuttles, because there's obviously purpose-built shuttle parks, right? And we could name one of them that's an hour south of Chattanooga called Jared's Place. Another one that's a couple hours east of Chattanooga called Ride Rock Creek. Or you could, even closer to Chattanooga, is Windrock Bike Park. So those are all purpose-built shuttle mountain bike parks, correct? And the direction we're going might not be there.
Yeah. And I will preface this with, I do love riding a lift every now and again. Whistler Bike Park, great. Like, top of the world, awesome. I'll take the gondola to the top if I have to. And, I think I will kick this off with exposing my own biases. And I ride my bike to be outside and to be in nature. So for me, the age old adage of it's not the destination, it's the journey. Case in point, did a ride in Fernie at one point where I rode 12 miles, climbed 3,500 feet, pushed my bicycle for a half-mile uphill. So case in point, Walden's it's up 700 feet over 2.5 miles from top to bottom. Lactic Ridge is 666 feet over half a mile. So, and I was out for 2.5 hours of moving time and 3 hours total. For me, that's a ride. I go out, I don't care how far long I'm out. I rode some sweet downhill, but I also pedaled a crap ton of uphill. So that's why I ride a bicycle. You look at folks that have gotten into this sport who may just want to go downhill. We're seeing a huge rise in parks. Jared's Place, you mentioned, Ride Rock Creek, where their primary goal is to go downhill as fast as they can. And the uphill is just getting in the way, for lack of a better term. Many ways to handle that. E-bikes are a thing. Shuttling is a thing. So I think we all have to acknowledge why we're riding bikes and be able to acknowledge there are many different ways that people ride bikes, and we need to support them all. But some of them are easier to support than others. And if we start to talk about shuttling, I think it becomes interesting. I'm completely lost, Josh. I've wandered off into a place that I can't get myself out of.
Let's pause for a second and just bring up a fact about Walden's Ridge. Walden's Ridge is open for e-bikes.
It is open for e-bikes.
So before somebody goes off on a tangent thinking, because you said the word e-bike, and sometimes e-bike, especially if you look at Pink Bike comments, incites a lot of, we'll say, negative emotions. We're not going down that path because that's not what we're here to do. And e-bikes serve a very good purpose, and they're allowed at Walden's Ridge. And so that could be your form of a shuttle.
Yes, that could be a form of shuttle. And I think, so you've got me back on track. Here we go. So I think once you acknowledge why you're riding a bicycle, it kind of changes your view of the world. So for me, 3 hours on a bicycle, that's all good time spent. I don't necessarily need to get uphill as fast as I can to get downhill, which is where I get, most of my excitement. For those folks that don't hold that belief, getting uphill as fast as they can is their primary goal, such that they can go downhill as fast as they can. And that can cause some friction. We talk about e-bikes. Everybody's got their opinions on e-bikes. I almost got run over by a guy in an e-bike at Walden's one day. I heard him coming up behind me, and I fumbled a pedal stroke, and he literally tried to get around me and almost ran me over. And I was not super excited about that. So that caused a trail conflict. The same thing with shuttling. So if you look at Walden's, the parking lot at the top is not the most amazing parking lot for lots of vehicles because of where it's at on the mountain. So, if a lot of people like to shuttle, that kind of clogs up the parking lot, which changes things. It also changes the downhill dynamics because, again, people are trying to get downhill as fast as they can. So, I think we all just need to understand why we're riding bikes and be accepting of why other people ride bikes and not get too aggro around the way people ride bikes. I mean, we're all doing it for a reason. I feel like we've wandered off into this never land of shuttling.
No, you've illustrated some points, and we can move on from this, but you've illustrated some points that I think are very important to just remind people of. And most of the people that listen to this podcast, if not all of them, fully understand what I'm about to say next, which is just expect and respect other users. Like that's a sign that I saw in Steamboat. I think it was Steamboat. No, it was Breckenridge. Yeah. We're talking biker versus biker conflict at the moment. Not that we're going to go off on this tangent of user conflict, but it's magnified when you have hiker versus biker conflict or equestrian user versus biker conflict, and just having a little bit of empathy and slowing down. Especially when we're in public spaces, we're not talking about is the bike park experience that is a private pay to play bike park, right? We're talking about a public land, many different users are there for many different experiences, and to be a little bit more respectful of what that experience might be. Although I maybe will call out one type of experience that I think should be banned, and that's Bluetooth speakers. that is an experience that nobody needs to deal with. It will leave it at that.
Oh man, e-bikes and Bluetooth speakers.
Headphones are a close second to that, only because I feel really bad as a trail user when I come up behind someone with headphones on. They could be on a bike, they could be on foot. I highly doubt many equestrian people are using headphones, but whatever, it could happen. And I always feel horrible startling them when you almost have to yell to say, hey, I'm here. I would like to get by at a reasonable location, but they're just in their own zone doing whatever they do.
I mean, I will own the fact that I'm a headphone user while I ride my bike, but it is only one ear.
And that's a perfect example. You still have awareness of what's going on around you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's user conflict. I mean, user conflicts can be caused by both parties. One of them being typically a bicyclist moving more quickly than a hiker, but a hiker that does not yield the trail, even though they have the right of way, they does not yield the trail, can also cause issues. So, yeah, I think that is a really good point to make, is that we're all out there together. And I think you brought up a really good point that I want to double down on, is this whole idea of public bike parks versus pay to play bike parks. And I think as the industry, as our communities move more towards, I feel like at least the community that I'm seeing in Chattanooga, part of it is moving more towards this desire for a bike park experience, acknowledging that you are on public land versus you are paying for this right to do this is hugely important. And I think the one thing that we are seeing at Walden predominantly, because it was, it's more bike park like, is the expectation of paid bike park experience at a public park. And, you and I have talked about this idea of public versus private bike parks. And I think that, I don't know where we'll end up on that, but they are different experiences. And I will say to everybody listening to this podcast, if you want the unadulterated bike park experience, Go pay one of these amazing places to ride at their bike park. But please don't expect a public place where you have many different users groups to give you that same experience, because then everybody gets in trouble because there's a mismatch in expectation.
I can't agree with that more. Like I've been thinking about that actually. I had a long drive, not long as relative. So it's 7 hours of driving up to Copper Harbor and back, last week for some work. And I was thinking about, where do you draw the line? How many feature rich trails do you build in a public setting, for various reasons? We could talk about maintenance, risk, whatever, doesn't matter, versus are we actually by doing that, are we taking away from some of the business that could be generated at the pay to play bike parks, which I think is a model that serves our community very well, and a model that we need to continue to support as a mountain bike community, because you can do certain things at these pay to play bike parks that you're not going to be able to do in a public setting. It's just how it is, right? They have paid staff, they have other infrastructure in place that just allows for, it's like, so I'm not a backcountry skier just because I don't have backcountry access in Wisconsin. But I can imagine it's similar to that backcountry experience versus going to the resort, whatever that resort is, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have done both. So I agree with you. And I think having the paid staff is one thing, but you keep touching on it, and it becomes hugely important to a nonprofit organization, the liability aspect of it. So, you go to a bike park, you sign a waiver, you pay money. In the state of Tennessee, that affords you a certain liability and risk structure that is not the same as going to a public bike park. I think understanding that is important for folks that want to push that. Why don't we build harder trails? So we are getting ready to open, hopefully soon, the first double black diamond trail in the city of Chattanooga. It's called Stonemason. It's up on the side of Walden's. It is, how do you describe Stonemason? So it starts out pretty rocky. The alt line is called Clear Eyes. It's a black diamond trail. There's some super sweet like mini Squamish rock rolls on there, like big slab rock rolls. And then Clear Eyes goes around and kind of dumps down, and you really don't ever have to leave the ground. Wheels are on the ground. It's steep. Like the last roll into Clear Eyes is probably 45-degree drop in. Like it's heady for sure. And then Stonemason has this like 6-foot drop, legit diving board, like slow roll down into this thing. And for the longest time, I just like shook my head. And I was like, oh man, is this something we want to do? Because at some point, heaven forbid, somebody hurt themselves, decide that they don't want to take, responsibility for their actions, which happens in America these days. We can all, I think, agree on that. What does that do to our community? And for the longest time, I was just like, nope, are we really going to do this? And we had Shaggy came in, did some work, did a great job. We're going to open it. Like the county is going to open this double black diamond 6-foot drop. And I'm like, great. Okay, we're going to do this. In a bike park, you'd be like, whatever. We're going to do this. You signed a waiver, like, good luck. And now there's somebody in this listening to this podcast saying, yeah, but you can still, yes, we all know that this is America and you can litigate against anybody you want. But it changes the equation when you're thinking about this in a public bike park. So I think that's, again, goes into your point of pay to play bike parks fill an important role in our communities, providing experiences to our communities that they want, which actually takes pressure off the nonprofit organizations to not have to provide that experience to our communities, because those experiences are harder for us to do, especially with land manager relationships and things like that. So they play an important part, and I love to see them. It's not a place I hang out, but I know a lot of people that hang out there. So I think they're important, but we need to balance I want people to understand that we're doing our best that we can to build that kind of stuff, but at some point we just won't be able to build that stuff on public lands.
And again, like this is where having the bike parks supporting their business models by supporting the fact that, we pay to play there. And I know some people are going to say, yeah, but it needs to be fair and equitable for everybody. It's like, well, some business models just aren't like that. Let's move on to other Chattanooga trail systems. Because you have another, and I don't know anything about this trail system, including the name, but I know there's another new trail system that is either recently opened or will be opening or is under construction in Chattanooga. But then also there's a handful of other trail systems that have been, we can call them legacy trail systems like Raccoon Mountain or White Oak Mountain at the 7-Day Adventist. I always get all the Oak Mountain stuff confused because there's so many Oak Mountains in the south part of the country.
Yeah. So the one you're referring to is Etna Mountain. So it is just across the road from Raccoon. So that is land owned by the Tennessee River Gorge Trust, a great nonprofit in town that protects the Tennessee River Gorge from development. Anybody that's been to Chattanooga, the gorge is beautiful. So they have 4 miles of trail on the ground right now, are currently fundraising for the next 4 miles of trail, which will put that system at 8. Unfortunately, Etna's in this weird spot where if you don't live close to Etna, driving for 4 miles of trail, that is almost 7 if you ride it all both directions, isn't something you want to do. But with 8 miles, it will now become a destination where people are like, oh, I'm going to drive over, across town to go do that. I am excited about Etna because we now have Waldens. It takes the pressure off, as identified by IMBA Trail Solutions, of us building more of that style of trail, but allowing us to focus on blues and greens. So beginning to cater to a segment of the population that doesn't want to go huck the big stuff at Walden. So right now they've got a green trail, which is pretty fun, about 1.5 miles. They have a blue trail that is technically relatively easy, but cardiovascular wise is challenging just because of where it sits on the mountain. The next 4 miles will be, I believe, all accessible. So the goal is to build those trails with folks in alternative bikes in mind. So folks, that might have a spinal cord injury. So I'm excited about that because it brings more of that type of trail to town. I think it's 2 miles of green purpose-built and 2 miles of blue purpose-built. And I want to say one of the blue trails is downhill only, but I would have to go back and look at the master plan on that. So that'll be the next 4 miles in town. So again, new trail. And then we get into legacy trails. So Raccoon Mountain is the big one, which was built all by volunteers. It is a very special place because it is on TVA land, but not just any TVA land. Raccoon Mountain is a working power generation station. So we are allowed to recreate on property that is generating massive amounts of power for the Tennessee Valley every day, which makes our relationship with the TVA at Raccoon Mountain very fruitful, but also very, very challenging just because, you're talking about a generation station. What else do we have? We have 5 Points, which is down across the border in Georgia, which is one of my favorite places to ride because it's close to the house. And combine 5 Points with other properties, and you can now ride from your car almost 40 miles of cross-country single track with some fun downhills in there, all from one car, which is pretty amazing. So you've got 5 Points, you've got the Durham Trails, you've got Moonshine. What else have we got? Enterprise South, which is, I'll call it the beginner location. It is also the #1 trail location with tourists in all of Chattanooga. So a lot of families will come there as they drive through town. That's county property out on the east side of town. White Oak Mountain, which is out at Southern Adventist University. Shout out to Todd Weaver and his folks who keep that place in tip-top shape. Again, some fun kind of up and down stuff. They've got some purpose-built downhill stuff out there as well. What am I forgetting? Booker T. Washington, where it all started, which is north of town. A fascinating place. So growing up in the north, I never really experienced, the South and segregation and Civil War history. Booker T. Washington State Park was the state park for Black people in Chattanooga during segregation. So to be able to have trails out there and be able to celebrate that history is pretty cool. Shout out to Mac McBee, who's one of our volunteers out there. Wonderful Black gentleman who rides his bike all over that place and loves that park. Where else? What have I forgotten? Someone's going to tell me I've forgotten something.
Is there, maybe this is Enterprise, but is there like a trail system near a car auto plant?
That's Enterprise.
Okay.
That's near the VW plant.
Yeah, that's
so,
it.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, like we've got a bunch of trail, and the nice thing about having IMBA come to town to do Trail Accelerator grants is they hand you a planning document that tells you exactly kind of where you're at with your trail systems. And we're lucky to have two of them. So we have the Walden's Ridge one, which was done 7 years ago, and then we have the Etna one that was done 2 years ago, I believe. So we have a really good picture of where we are as a community, as a trail community, with respect to our trail inventory. What do we have? What are we lacking? And that's been great. So anybody looking to kind of get that information, these Trail Accelerator grants from IMBA, I will give the Trail Solutions a shout out for those. They're great because they give you this big document with a bunch of great information that says, like, here's what you need to serve your community.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out too, because when it says Trail Accelerator in the name, they do really accelerate the process of getting those trails built in almost all situations. Yep. I know, your experience with Walden's Ridge, that was, I believe, awarded as a Trail Accelerator grant at the same time that the local system here in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is known as the Gateway Trails, was also a Trail Accelerator grant. And we went from being awarded the grant in 2018 to building the trails in 2020 and opening them in October of 2020. And that's a very short timeline, especially when you're dealing with public land that didn't necessarily have any formalized trails on it prior to that project. And so anyone that's been a trail advocate knows sometimes how long the process can be to go from even just talking about trails to getting a shovel in the ground.
Yeah. I mean, you had Daniel Sapp on, and their experience with the Forest Service is very different than our experience with. So we have the TVA. You're talking a federal land manager, NEPA studies, the whole 9 yards. You have Hamilton County at Walden's Ridge and Enterprise South. So Hamilton County was handed Walden's Ridge. We built it with a consortium of nonprofits and then handed that land to the county. So very easy, because they just got a big piece of property that is worth millions of dollars on the side of town. But then you go to like working with the Tennessee River Gorge Trust, a private landowner who has a mission. Their mission is to preserve the Tennessee River Gorge. And the reason they're building mountain biking trails is because that's the way they preserve the gorge. They get people out there, they have this land. They're actually doing land swaps with the land developer out there. And they're swapping undevelopable land for land they can build houses on. A great example of, hey, everybody wins in this situation. Big shout out to Black Creek for their work with Tennessee River Gorge Trust and all of the land that's changing hands up on the side of Etna. Great point. So the Etna plan actually calls for a 30-mile backcountry loop to be built on a piece of property. We're talking probably 5 years out, but think of a 30-mile backcountry loop in Chattanooga, in addition to all the things we already have. So and Tennessee River Gorge Trust is like, yeah, let's go build this. So, working with them is great. We have the city of Chattanooga at Stringer's Ridge, again, kind of hit or miss. So I don't know where I was going with this, but I think the key to take away is that every land manager has their own constraints. And these Trail Accelerator grants help you identify those and move past those.
All of this is a prime example of our next topic, which is hiring an executive director, or generally speaking, paid staff for your trail org, because everything we've talked about to this point includes a lot of work on the back end and after it's built, or on the front end, and after it's built, and right now, SORBA Chattanooga is in the process of hiring an executive director. When we first met and were talking, that was a role that you were advocating to try to get funded. It sounds like, from what I've seen, it's being funded through a foundation, a Lynn Harris Foundation grant. But let's talk about how you got to why you want to hire an executive director. Some of the people that listen to this are going to know that why, but not everybody does, and where that's at, and how people can actually help raise more funds for this because there are also grant matching opportunities.
Yeah. So when I joined the board, I think it was 2021 or 22, we had been talking about trying to hire an executive director. And the more I talk to folks around town, we're probably about 5 years late in hiring an executive director. And I think the reason we want an executive director is to have someone to be able to focus on this full time. So as I mentioned, I'm a software developer. I quit my full-time job in June of 2023, because I was not super happy of where I was at. And I set aside a year's worth of funding to pay myself to be the executive director of SORBA Chattanooga to do this work. And the downside of being an all-volunteer organization is that it is nobody's job to focus on this stuff. And it happens in fits and spurts. And it's really hard to keep the momentum going when your life changes. So our previous president, Les Warnock, I think Olive is 3 now. So he has a small child. Life changed for Les. Les had to step down because he couldn't dedicate time to this. So I was like, I'm going to do this. I have no kids. I'm a software developer. I can put some money in the bank to make this happen. And it is the best thing that has happened to our organization because it allows us to focus on this full time. And everybody, I think probably every chapter leader in SORBA is now nodding their head as they listen to this podcast. And yeah, we are lucky to have the Lyndhurst Foundation in Chattanooga. So huge shout out to Bruz and the board of the Lyndhurst Foundation for believing in our mission. They are part of the family that first bottled Coca-Cola in Chattanooga, a huge investor in our trails. I think they put a bunch of money into Walden's, and we applied for this grant. They saw our vision with the goal of focusing full time on expanding mountain biking in Chattanooga. And that's not just trails. I'm going to get myself in trouble with the community saying this, but if we don't build another mile of new trail in Chattanooga for a little bit, I'm kind of okay with that. Where I want us to focus is maintaining what we've got, but also building the community. So, we have kids in Chattanooga who live in Alton Park, which is the next neighborhood over from me, that have never ridden a mountain bike. We have small children who have never been on trails. We want to expand that community. So by hiring an ED, it allows us to focus full time on this and raise a bunch of money. I mean, we can all agree there's nothing you can't do with a big pot of money. So as we move into this future, it's how do we go fund this thing to be able to focus on building our community.
What is your timeline? Because, and the reason why I ask that is the timeliness of this podcast coming out might be ahead of before you actually, you're soliciting applications now, I believe, but
yes.
When are you going to be soliciting applications through, I guess is a better question. So if somebody listening to this, say when it comes out, which is going to be a couple weeks from when we record this, what is your ideal timeline for finding the candidates and putting that person in place?
Yep. So we are currently accepting applications. You can go to sorbachattanooga.org. There's a big button at the top, lets you view the application. We originally had set the end of July as our deadline, but one of our great board members, they're like, well, maybe we should just say until it's filled. And one of our goals is to find the right person. So, we don't want to hire too quickly just to hire, because we really see this as this first hire is going to be really important. So if you're listening to this, reach out to us to find out if we're still taking applications. We might be, we might not be. If we find that right person, would be awesome sooner rather than later, because we have a lot of work to do and I need to go back to work to start making money again, unfortunately. So yeah, we're in the process of hiring right now.
Just so everyone is also aware, the grant match. So I believe it's a $50,000 grant, correct? And so are they matching? Is that going to be matched to 100 or more than that?
That'll be matched to 100. So we were handed a $50,000 check from the Lyndhurst Foundation to kickstart this process. I'm thinking of this like we're starting a startup. So anybody that has worked in startup world or started their own business, like I'm looking at the 50 grand as seed money. And then the Lyndhurst Foundation has graciously offered to match the next $50,000 that we raise dollar for dollar to get us to 100. So at the end of the process, we will have $150,000 in the bank to make this happen, which will get us, by my calculations, about 2 years of executive director salary. So again, our goal is to be able to create a runway for this human, because their job will be to go out and raise a bunch of money to get them to a place where they can not have to worry about paying their own salary day one, but be able to go create relationships in town. So yeah, they're matching dollar for dollar up to 100,000, which will give us 150,000.
That's exactly the math that I was looking for. Your relationship with SORBA, they have, I think, 47 clubs right now under that umbrella. A lot of them have executive directors. Some of them don't. I know that the organizations that don't are looking at your organization to see how this goes, because they're also in the position to want to, potentially hire an executive director, which is why I love having you on the show, so we can kind of talk about this on the front end, and some of the stuff that goes along with why an executive director and whatnot. But how's your relationship with SORBA? Like, it's a super important organization, and talk about some of the stuff, the benefits you get from being from SORBA Chattanooga, being a part of the bigger SORBA, the SORBA mothership.
The SORBA Maine, as we call them. Shout out to Philip and Jen at SORBA Maine. It's been great. I mean, huge. So you say a lot. I believe we will be the third chapter within 47 to hire an executive director. So
Really?
Knoxville was first. Yeah. I think Atlanta might have one. I don't know if Mountain Bike Atlanta has one or not. So I know Knoxville does. So huge shout out to Matthew Kellogg at AMBC. Has been a huge help in us getting started down this path, looking at what they've built in Knoxville. Pisgah area SORBA, huge shout out to Natalie and her board for, again, just being hugely helpful. I mean, Natalie literally handed me all of their hiring documents. What they actually used those documents to hire her as the executive director. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And that is what we get for being part of SORBA. We get access to all these humans who are kind of solving the same problems we are. And my goal is that through our journey, we will be able to offer that same help to other clubs, other organizations, not just within SORBA, but across the country that are trying to do this, because it is a non-trivial thing, especially if you're all volunteers. I mean, I spent an hour and a half this morning taking applications, putting them in a spreadsheet, downloading resumes. Like it's a thing.
Yeah, work is a thing. It's crazy when you think about like all the stuff that happens that people just never see, right?
You're running a business. You're running a trail advocacy business. You're legitimately running a nonprofit, and there are nonprofits all over the country that are doing this work. So yeah, I mean, and that's what we get from SORBA. I think, our relationship with SORBA is interesting. So SORBA Chattanooga rolls up to SORBA Maine. SORBA Maine is part of the IMBA local program. So we have a direct line to IMBA, and we get benefits from all of that. So IMBA handles all of our membership. We get all the IMBA membership benefits, which is great. Being part of SORBA, I go to a twice a year conference within SORBA. So we all get together. We hang out in a really cool place. I think where's the next one? Oh, the next one is actually down in Alabama. So we're going to Oak Mountain, another Oak Mountain.
That's where I get confused out of the Oak Mountains. There's Oak Mountain, There's White Oak Mountain, there's Little Oak Mountain.
Yeah. So that's another thing is we have access to these conferences where we go and hang out with people. And yes, there's bike riding, and yes, there's beer drinking, or whatever your alternative beverage is. But we attend talks. We get to have we get to catch up with people. So that's another huge benefit. We also get notoriety. So I'm going to talk about this in loose terms because I don't know if I can talk about it in specific terms, but we are partnering with a national land advocacy organization to try to get a huge grant for all of the Southeast. So through some connections that I have in Chattanooga, we have gotten into this partnership with we're talking millions of dollar grant process that SORBA will be one of the implementation partners for. So bringing millions of federal dollars to our communities. And we would not have been able to do that had we not had this organization, this consistent face of our organization to be able to unify under these things. So there's huge benefits to being part of SORBA Maine. Now, people will badmouth IMBA for whatever reason they want to badmouth IMBA for, but there are definitely benefits to it.
Yeah, when it comes to IMBA and even SORBA, like IMBA specifically is the only national, even though it says international in the name, but the only national mountain bike specific organization, period. And if you like riding your mountain bike, chances are they're working on some kind of advocacy or access or something that's going to help you do more of that, right?
Yep. Yeah. There's good, like everything else. Their stance on bikes in the wilderness was kind of set people off. And
yeah.
So I think our biggest benefit is having access to that brain trust of humans that are all kind of solving the same problems we are. And the nice thing is, like, we're all working in the same direction. So like when I go to Pisgah, I can go ride Butter Gap, which Pisgah area SORBA has just graciously rebuilt for us. And
I'm familiar with that. I know the people who did it.
Yeah. Did you get to ride Butter? Oh no, you didn't ride. You guys know it.
No, I got to ride. I did a preview ride a couple days after the trail conference back in March. So it was about, I think, maybe half built at that point. And so I did a preview ride with Pisgah area SORBA staff and then a couple of Rock Solid staff, because that was a Rock Solid, contract build.
Yeah.
We just recently in the last couple of weeks finished that project. It took a little bit longer than initially anticipated, but the end product is, I know, in talking to various people around the Pisgah area, both with Pisgah area SORBA and otherwise, that they're very impressed and happy with the level of work that was done. And they're glad that it was able to get rebuilt in the fashion that it was. So
yeah. They've caught some flack for the Black Mountain rebuild and yada yada yada. But that's a whole nother topic for a podcast of sanitizing, or to sanitize or not to sanitize trails. And as you can imagine, I have my opinions on that. I think one thing I do want to leave people with is that regardless of where your organization, where you are, your trail advocacy organizations are hugely important. In my visit, I was up in Cumberland 2 summers ago, spent a month in Cumberland, British Columbia. The work that UROC is doing in Cumberland, and if you've never seen Cumberland, go look it up on Trail Forks. And just your mind will be blown about the trails these folks have built. And it's not just the quantity, but it's the quality, all built by a trail organization. So join your trail organization, donate money. Yes, bikes are expensive, but trails are expensive too. So please figure out how you can give back in your own way to your local trail organization. Because without them, guess what happens? Like, we might not need bikes because the trails just won't be there. They just may or may not exist.
And with that, we can plug, it'll be 2 episodes ago at this point. Daniel Sapp's episode number 174 of Without Trails, We Don't Need Bikes. And if you want to get a preview of the sanitization of certain trails, Daniel goes off a little bit on that within that podcast. And it's important. It's an important topic. I think it's important to hear people's opinions too, to kind of understand where people are coming from. So I'm not saying that in a way to shut people down and expressing their opinions. Maybe they could be expressed sometimes in a little bit more professional manner, but that's a different story too.
Yeah. I think we need to keep the dialogue open because as you pointed out, all these opinions are important. We just need to do them in a constructive manner. And this is my favorite thing to do on Facebook. So we have a group on Facebook called Chattanooga Area Mountain Biking. I think there are like 7,500 people in there. And as many can imagine, that sometimes becomes some of those posts become kind of a cesspool when it comes to comments. But the one thing I always tell people is I am always happy to talk about this stuff face to face.
Yes.
It is hugely important. We should sit down and talk about this stuff because your opinion is important as long as we can use it. And I think Daniel talked about this. in a constructive manner to push our communities forward.
Yeah, he did a very good job.
That's the thing.
He was concerned it was a little bit negative, and after when I was editing, before it was released, I reassured him, like, look, like the way it was talked about, and it wasn't a huge part of the show, but I think the way it was talked about was A, pointed and necessary, but B, constructive and professional, and it was good. It was really good. I was glad to have the conversation. Let's just say, let's get into let's stick with the opinions. We're gonna wrap this one up, and this is a question I ask a lot of people, and that is, what do you look for in a trail community? I mean, you've already alluded to the fact you've traveled a lot. You've been fortunate to see at least a lot of parts of North America, both, in the lower 48, but also in north of the border in Canada. So with that, talk about things you like to see or would like to see in a trail community from your own, I'm going to say this in the most kindest way possible, in your own selfish manner, because I believe it's important to take all these little ingredients that people have and people talk about and put them into like a melding pot so people can get different ideas to do in their own communities. Yeah.
I mean, obviously trails are a thing. I mean, you have to have good trails. And I think around trails is communities that get behind their trails. So the work we've done in Chattanooga, stuff I've alluded to in Cumberland, British Columbia. I spent some time in Bellingham 2 summers ago, and you roll into Bellingham and you're like, yep, this is a bike town. The second thing is the whole community doing it. I mean, Bellingham is great because they've got this little skills area down by the water where you see kids on striders. And this is one of the things we're struggling with in Chattanooga. Anybody listening to this from Chattanooga, yes, I'm working on a pump track. Please don't ask anymore. But that is one of the things we're struggling with is people go to Knoxville and see what Knoxville has done at Baker Creek. And we are working with the city and county to try to make this happen. So, movement towards areas that kids and beginners can get out and do stuff that doesn't require them to get on trails or get in their car to go out to trails. And then the last one is just a really good support from the business community. I mean, wandering around Fernie, there's signs everywhere. Join your local trail advocacy organization. The bike stops are super helpful. I work at Suck Creek Cycle back in Chattanooga a couple of days a week, and there's a thing when the community supports your trails. And that's hugely important because, as we've touched on, and I will touch on again, there is nothing you can't solve with a big bucket of money. I mean, I will give a shout out to Bentonville here. As much as I hate to hear how cool Bentonville is, they are a shining star of what can happen when you have monetary support from the community to make things happen. So, having businesses get involved. We have a huge shout out to Clever Ale House in Red Bank, Jeff and the team there. Jeff continually seeks out ways to give us money. I mean, the dude is just literally he's a mountain biker. He made some shirts up, gave us half the proceeds. The other half went to White Oak Bike Co-op. They run fundraisers for us. So I think finding a community where the businesses who are benefiting from mountain bikers being there, we can all, I think, agree that there is a economic benefit to that. Getting involved and having business owners proactively give back to their trail organization.
Yeah, that's and this is where I want to say, if a business is listening to this and they're giving back to the trail organization and you want to make it known, make sure you make it known. Not everybody wants to make their donations known, but if you're a business that is looking to make your donations known, let other people know, because I know for me personally, I'm much more likely to support a business that I know is supporting the community than isn't, right?
Yeah. And that's another reason I want an executive director for our organization. I want to become their marketing department. I am more than happy if they want, to bang that drum around town. We're hopefully going to work on. But again, yeah, it is hugely important for that community support. We're trying to figure that out.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time today. Is there any topics that we should discuss that we didn't discuss before we hang this one up and send it out into the world for people to consume?
No, I think we're good. I mean, I will again leave everybody with the figure out the way you can give back to your local trail organization. I think it's hugely important for us and for our communities to have solid mechanisms for outdoors, because as SORBA Maine likes to say, we firmly believe that everybody should have the social, physical, and mental benefits that mountain biking brings. So the way we do that is we get involved and we move this forward in a constructive way.
Yeah, that's a good way to.
We could go on with e-bikes, but that's a whole nother podcast. So I won't open up that can of worms.
We'll leave it with what you previously said about SORBA and making sure everybody has access to trails, because it's an important thing. And we see it time and time again where it helps communities. It helps the people that live in those communities. There's just so many benefits that come from trails. So I really appreciate your time today and carving out some time out of your schedule to be able to knock this one out. We got some good podcast guests coming up, and you're following up a really good one with Glenn Jacobs will be, the guest that comes out just before this one. So there'll be Glenn always gets a lot of listeners. It'll be his second time on the show. And so you'll get some good ears in this one too. So I appreciate that, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. And thank you for all the work that you do. I know I've listened to many of these podcasts in one ear on an uphill climb while I'm suffering. And it has definitely shaped the way that I look at this community, far outside of like what trails I'm riding and how good the trails are. And it's really awesome that we have the opportunity to be part of this and just keep pushing this forward.
I appreciate that comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you've heard, please take the time to share these shows with others. Sharing these shows will help create awareness of both the guests who have taken the time to be on the show and the podcast series itself. Also, if you're new to the Trail Effect Podcast, check out our ever-expanding library of episodes. If you listen to the Trail Effect Podcast on Apple or Spotify, please don't forget to leave a rating and review, as this is one of the best ways to show our support for the Trail Effect Podcast. Also, don't forget to check out Cooley Creative at www.dudejustsendit.com. For additional ways to help support the Trail Effect Podcast, check out the affiliate links tab at the Trail Effect website, where you'll find links to Kettle Mountain Apparel, Worldwide Cyclery, and Trail One components. By using the affiliate links found at www.traileffectpodcast.com, a small commission will come back to the podcast, which will help keep this thing going. This podcast has been edited and produced by Evolution Trail Services. Thank you again for listening.